So it is laid out. It is readable. It is dull. So it is not going to be impossible for folks to read and to understand. It is really dull to read. So that's going to be the challenge that you have reading it. Not is it readable, because it's not written in lawyerly language, as some people have accused it. Folks who've never read it have accused it of being. If you're interested, it's also organized by chapters, so there's a table of contents. So again, sections are there, you can read through them, should you choose to do so. I want to answer 3 questions about the text and about the agreement, the top 3 questions that I've received. First off, the classic opening question, right, is really, are you going to vote for it and have you read it? I don't know and no. Short answer. I don't know if I'm going to vote for it, and I have not read all of it. This is my copy here. It is marked up in sections that folks have expressed more interest in than others. I'll just give you, for instance, I have not touched the chapter to date on cooperation and capacity building, because nobody has asked me about cooperation and capacity building. I will get to it, but no one's asked about it, so I haven't spent any time on it. Another question that we get is about the investor-state dispute settlement process and the tribunals. And the main question I get there is, can't these supersede our courts? My assessment on that is, no, I don't see how that can happen. This is and it's a very fundamental constitutional question that people ask, and it's a very fundamental constitutional answer from my assessment. And that is, this is an agreement that a president negotiated, that a Congress, if it passes, it goes to both House and Senate, and then goes to the president, and it becomes a creature of the Constitution. It becomes a creature of a congressional executive agreement. It therefore is subject to the restraints of the Constitution. The Supreme Court has been very clear about any agreements between the United States and foreign nations, any agreements between the United States and foreign nations, do not escape the restraints of the Constitution. And there's a 1957 case where this was established, not established, but was reiterated, and you're free to look it up if you'd like. Again, that is actually a legal document and is tougher to read, but it's very clear, it's very plain what the Supreme Court said then. It's very clear that the Supreme Court is more than willing to exercise its prerogative on the Constitution. And the Supreme Court, disagreeing with the Supreme Court's decision and how they interpret the Constitution is not the same thing. I disagree with the Supreme Court's decision on Citizens United. I think we need to overturn the Citizens United decision by the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court has the authority to determine what is and what isn't constitutional, and will exercise it. And it's clear when it comes to agreements between the United States and foreign nations, the Supreme Court, by precedent and by custom, says it has the authority to regulate, to determine what is and what isn't constitutional in agreements between the U.S. and foreign nations. So that's what I would assess on that. If someone has a different argument, I'm certainly willing to listen to that. But it really seems clear that when the Constitution says the Supreme Court is sort of arbiter of the supreme law of the land, that they mean it, and the Constitution means it. Finally, just note a question about it's a general question about, will it create a race to the bottom on wages and working standards? It's kind of a generalized question people provide. Will it create that? I think it's arguable that it will. I think it's arguable that it won't. I think for folks who have that main concern, reading through Chapter 19 on labor standards would be a really important start for someone to try to answer that question for themselves. Unlike the North American Free Trade Agreement, this agreement does in fact have a labor chapter inside the agreement. It has labor standards inside the agreement. the labor standards are subject to the dispute settlement process that is inside the agreement. None of that existed with NAFTA, so that makes it very different from the North American Free Trade Agreement. The big question, and really the underlying question, has to do with enforcement and the willingness of this administration or any administration in the future to enforce the trade agreement. And that's also a fair question. A question that's come up a couple of times in other meetings, and I think that's one that I've been asking the administration, and now that the text is out, we'll be able to, I would think, be able to get some better answers from the administration. On that point, even though China is not, and to be clear, China is not a party to this agreement. Some people talk as if it is, but it is not. The administration, through the U.S. Trade Rep's office over the last several years, has created a specific trade enforcement center focused on building cases to take to the WTO against China. And it has been very successful, one, in building those cases, and second, winning those cases. So when an administration wants to enforce a trade agreement and wants to enforce trade rules, it can. So therefore, it also can be a matter of will, political will of an administration to do so. And it's certainly worth exploring. Even if this doesn't pass, we still have other trade agreements, and it's still worth exploring whether administrations will create and have the political will to enforce existing trade agreements. So there's some comments as a matter of introduction. Three things on ground rules today. One is, again, the camera's here, it'll be on me. I'm going to be sitting. I don't mean to be rude. I usually stand at town halls. I re-aggravated my left foot. Some of you might remember I broke my heel in January 2014. The heel is fine. Thank you for asking. The muscles and tissues around it were almost there, and then I re-aggravated it, and it's probably it's called an atypical stress fracture. I don't know what atypical stress fracture is. I'm about to find out tomorrow when I see my orthopedic surgeon. So I'm going to be sitting just to rest my leg. I'm not even supposed to be standing this long, so the fact that I'm recording this and my wife and my doctor can see this is enough trouble. Second, I don't think we have a problem in this room because we're on the islands, but priority questions I want to give to folks from the islands. If you made it from off island, thank you for coming, but priority questions for folks from the islands. And as well, when you ask a question, you can state your name just for everyone else. And then finally, in the interest of time, one question and a follow-up. Don't try the old trick about I've got one question with 19 parts. I'll cut you off after two probably. But I also don't want to just cut you off and just ask. If you have a preamble, great. If you go on, I'm very patient. The folks behind you who are staring, with steely eyes at you may not be as patient. So try to be succinct to get to your question. But if you have a point to make too, I want you to do that. But at some point, I may jostle you along, and sometime after that, I may ask you to just get to the question, and we can move on. So it's a trust factor here on that, and I think that folks will respect each other at that point. So with that, thanks for coming. I'm going to get my water over here and take a seat. And get my pen out. So please, who would like to ask the first question? Yeah.
Move your chair more central.
I'm fine.
No, I'm thinking about me.
There's some empty seats up there if you want to come up front.
Yeah, it's not church.
See, yeah.
I expect empty seats in the church in the front.
In the other town, I'm Susan Dellendorf. In the other town hall meetings that you've held on this subject, what is the general tenor of the attendees? Do they wish you to vote for it or against it?
I haven't been taking a vote on that. Generally, town halls are self-selected. In terms of attendees are self-selected, and I never expected that I'd fill a room on a trade agreement with people who are for it. That could be fair. But can I expand a little bit more on that? The other reason, this is others with more experience, others less. In my 15 years of being in Congress and doing town halls, it's very unlikely at all, anyway, that you get that neutral people show up on any one issue. What drives people to attend is usually not the ability to observe, but because they have something to say about whatever issue it is. And so even on generalized town halls, where it could be any question about anything, no one usually comes to just observe. So that's the self-selection. The other point I want to make about town halls, they're very useful. Again, this is like crowdfunding my research on TPPs. Think of it that way. Getting questions from folks and getting some follow-up and being challenging the questions, being challenged myself, and trying to sort through what is and isn't fact out there and what is and isn't fact in the agreement. And so it's been very useful. But my experience though in town halls, like I had one in early '09 in Ferndale, and that was sort of the nascent Tea Party movement, and about 150 people showed up. Literally about 100 of them were Ron Paul supporters, libertarians, self-professed, and they wanted to take a vote in that room and let that vote determine my position on the audit of the Fed, right? That Ron Paul was going to audit the Fed. And even yesterday, after saying this, to respond to a different question, the gentleman got up and asked that we take a vote in that room in Clinton on this. And I said, look, you can do it, I'll leave. I'll close my ears, I'll close my eyes, you all take a vote and I'll come back and then we can continue on because, again, there's a sort of self-selection. So, yeah, the tenor's been against, but there's 675,000 people in the district. Some don't vote because they're under 18, but it's a lot of folks with a lot of different views, and probably a lot of folks with no view on TPP as well. Be my guess.
I'm Beverly Londalso. I've made a decision. What is it that you're still thinking about to make your decision?
The responsibility that I have as a member of Congress representing a large district, the responsibility I have as a member of Congress representing a district that has, in a state where 40% of the jobs are tied to trade somehow. When I was first elected in 2000, that number was about 33% of the jobs are tied to trade, so we've become more trade dependent. The responsibility that I have as a member of Congress representing a district that in the last, I forget the exact time frame here, but it's certainly in the most recent past, it's the #1 district in the country with jobs tied to trade with countries in Asia. So there's that part of the context of my decision-making process that has to do with the district as a whole. So, if you will, the whole rather than the individual parts. And then there are the individual parts. There are big companies like Boeing. There are small companies like Pacific Wood Tech, who are all trading into countries, exporting into countries that are part of this agreement, and therefore jobs directly tied to a successful trading relationship with these countries that could be more successful if this passed, or again, the assessment is, would it be less successful if this passed overall. So the other thing too is I've promised to read it. I haven't read it all the way through, and I have that responsibility. I appreciate if folks have made a decision about this agreement having not read it because you don't like trade, or you think trade's bad, or you think previous trade agreements have not worked in the past, and therefore there's no reason for you to read it. Yeah, that's your prerogative. I don't believe as a representative I have that prerogative. I think other members of Congress believe they do have that prerogative, but I'm not them, I'm me. And so that's why I haven't made a decision. So Lauren.
I'm Lauren Sands, and I actually am more of a neutral party. I read before I came here that the agreement was over 5,000 pages long.
Now you know it's a little bit less. The stuff you actually have to read is a little bit less.
Excellent. So I'm wondering what you believe the pros and the cons are, because anything that complex will have unintended consequences, whether positive or negative. And I'm interested in knowing what both the positives and the negatives are going to be in your eyes.
Sure, yeah, and I want to preface the answer of this, because I answered this question yesterday in previous meeting too. And then someone later said, oh, but look, all you did was list the positives. I said, let's be clear, someone asked me a direct question about what I thought the positives were, and I answered that question. And so I want to be clear. This is a direct question, and I'll do the negative side too. The way I've answered the positives question is to kind of look really at what the administration has said. What the administration said, first off, I would say that the agreement is probably not as great as the administration says it is, and it's probably not as bad as its opponents say it is. And that's generally been a rule about most everything I've worked on in 15 years in Congress. But if you go to the website for the White House or the U.S. Trade Rep's office on TPP, you would think that this is not just the best thing since sliced bread. We could get rid of sliced bread and use this instead. It's that good. So I'm going to talk to the White House about that, because it's really sometimes, it just isn't, that's just not a reality. But what they would say, there's at least one objectively positive thing on the website that's come across like a promotional material, is that the agreement, if you go through the tariff schedule, the agreement does in fact cut 18,000 separate tariffs. They call it, in the White House calls them tax cuts, because that language is much more exciting for people when we talk about tax cuts. But they are cuts in tariffs on the products made, grown, services produced in this country, and it will cut the cost of them, of getting into exporting into these 11 other countries, and that is a good thing. It does lower a financial barrier for those things that we build, that we make, that we grow, that we otherwise produce, and lowering those barriers into another country is a good thing. So I think that's one thing that the administration would say. I think the second thing is that they'd say is, they would argue, is that this really does a better job than previous trade agreements on labor, on environment, even on investor-state dispute settlement. They would say, they'd point to specific provisions, I think, that would help us create a more level playing field for the companies and the workers in companies in the United States relative to the same in these other countries. I think they'd say that. And the third would be the strategic question you hear a lot about, the strategic question of China. So China's negotiating something called an RCEP right now. I think it stands for Regional Cooperative Economic Program. It's basically a trade agreement that China is leading and negotiating with many of the same countries that are in a party to this agreement and some others. And the administration is making the argument that it's better that the U.S. be setting the trade rules with these countries and the economic relationship rules, rather than having China set that. And if we don't do this, China is waiting and ready, willing, and able to get this RCEP done with these countries. Now, it in fact is true that that is what China is waiting for. The assessment, though, is whether or not that's is that a legitimate, is that a problem for us or not a problem for us? The administration would say it is. It's fair to assess that point. And so that's a positive. The negatives, I think, I won't rehash, or that's not the right word. I don't want to talk too much about the negatives, because I'm sure folks want to talk about the negatives here. But I think one of the concerns people have is whether or not ISDS is constitutional or not. I think the concern that people have about investor-state dispute settlement is, one, its applicability only to investors, whether those are large institutional investors, large corporations, or rich individuals, as opposed to you and me and the folks we know. And therefore, if it's limited, if access to investor-state dispute settlement is limited to a certain group of folks or companies and not to a broader group, then who's really setting the trade rules? It doesn't seem to be everybody in this room, but others. That's one negative. Second negative would be I mentioned the enforcement issue. It's one thing to have enforcement provisions. Objectively, you can look at them and say, there they are, and there is Chapter 28 dispute settlement, and it is applicable to things that we'd like to have enforced. But is it going to get enforced? And I think that's a pretty critical question to try to get answered. And then if I had to pick a third, I think it goes back to ISDS, and that's what people would express is the danger they believe exists that rules that cities, counties, states, even the federal government or laws that they pass or set up would be subject to challenge and potentially thrown out, or if not thrown out, the cost of defending those in an ISDS process would be crippling. And what about the rights of a democracy or democratic republic to establish our own rules, our own laws in order to defend the things that we think are important, like the environment, health, put down the list. So I think if you lined up the pros and the cons, that's a little bit about where things would play out. All worth assessing.
Yeah, thank you. And I was going to ask about your leg, by the way. Sorry to hear about its plight.
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Yeah. You've actually covered like almost all of the areas that I was interested in discussing. So I think I'd like to just maybe have a quick preamble and a concern and then a question, if that's okay. So for me, I really think that the role of government is to do the most good for the most people and the environment for the longest time. This was negotiated in secret by multinational corporations. And if we look at NAFTA as a model, it did result in the loss of jobs. We can associate the Zapatista revolution with the signing of NAFTA. And I do have concerns about democracy, which you've called out, which is great. And I respect your interest in reading through the document, but to me, given what I have heard from the internet and from organizations that are really focused on this issue, it seems quite clear, even at this point, that TPP is very similar to NAFTA and arguably worse than NAFTA in many ways. Certainly the magnitude of it is much greater. And I'm just kind of wondering, why are you not making a decision? I know you've talked to that, but I'm just wondering, in light of concerns with democracy, the clear use of this investor dispute mechanism, and also using something like TPP to refute laws that are democratically defined, that's a very clear and obvious concern, and NAFTA shows us that that's exactly what has happened.
Yeah, thanks. What's your name?
Ken.
Ken, thanks.
And
So,
I think I'm one of your trolls, so.
Oh, yeah, you are.
Yeah.
But you're actually one that has probably more in common with me than the others.
Good. I try to be very reasonable. I
Yeah.
want to have discussions.
Yeah. Many don't.
Yeah, I know.
Thanks, Ken.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I think that, so getting to the question of, well, why don't I make a decision? Well, part of it is if you, Here, I'm gonna compare myself to, actually, the press here, I won't compare myself to that. No, you know, a puppy, you know, one way you train a puppy to not pee on carpet, right, is like give them a little tap with a newspaper every once in a while, like, don't do that, and they get it, right? Well, you know, the ultimate example of that was the Affordable Care Act debate.
Okay.
Where, you know, one of the big cries from everybody was, read the bill, read the bill, read the bill. If you don't read the bill, then how can you make a decision on this?
Right.
Well, it's a very fair, and this is folks who are opposed to the Affordable Care Act. And so, and that's a very fair demand to make, honestly.
Yeah.
And so in looking at something this thick, this complex, it seems fair to read the bill. And you know, might be surprised about what I read in that. I was surprised by a few things in the Affordable Care Act.
But you have 3 months and it's 5,000 pages, right?
Well, I have more than that, and that gets the other timeline. So the point is, like, I've been hit with that newspaper a few times.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying.
Right, I
So
get you.
that's what I'm. The other thing I'd point out is in terms of the timeline. So the timeline under the Trade Promotion Authority law started when the president indicated his intent to sign, and they released this on November 5th. The administration did, and at that time, the president then as well indicated intent to sign. So the time the clock started, the clock's actually at least going to be at least 4 months,
Okay.
at least 120 days. So probably longer than that. Some folks are saying we shouldn't vote till after the election. You know, I'm saying, look, if Congress is ready to vote, just vote, because it's either hanging out there before the election, it's hanging out there after the election, it's hanging out there. So I've never seen an election swayed by when Congress timed a vote. I just haven't seen that.
Okay.
So it could be longer than 120 days, but here's the thing, on the Iran deal, which I voted for and supported the administration on, you know, we had, I forget, it was a 60-day or 90-day review period, and after 20 days, folks are saying you gotta decide, you have to decide. Like, actually, legally, I don't have to decide. I got another 40 days to review this thing. And besides that, this isn't the only thing I'm working on.
Right.
I've got plenty of other things I'm working on as well. And so, from a time management perspective, to do the right kind of job, in my view, you know, sort of got a longer time horizon than maybe folks in this room about redoing this, because there are other things. This isn't the only thing I'm getting a phone call on, right? This is a town hall on TPP, so everyone here is basically for TPP. I could have had one on immigration reform, and maybe some of the same folks that have shown up, but have been on immigration reform. But the point is, there's a lot of things on the plate of a member of Congress, and a lot of things on my plate that you care about. And you care about this too. Maybe you care about this relatively more, but you care about these other things, and I'm working on those other things too. So it's partly a timeline issue and taking the time to get through it, as well as making sure I've got time for the other things that people are requesting that I do as well. So that addresses the timeline. So I think that, well, and then I'll just, on the general points you've made about NAFTA versus TPP, I'll take that for the record. I appreciate expressing those
Thank you.
concerns.
Thank you for your time and thank you for coming here.
Yeah, sure. It's never hard to come to the islands, San Juan. Joe.
I'm Laura Jo Severson, and one of the questions I had was about how this, the TPP will impact sending jobs overseas. You know, we are doing that very much right now, and I see companies closing down or else reducing the number of employees. Also, one of the provisions in it says that a company who comes here can bring their own employees, which happens a lot, and I wondered if there's something that could be done.
Yeah.
Okay, on top of that, if you want to check with the food co-op, they sell this really neat little cream that is made on Lopez and will do a good job on your foot.
Because I don't have enough moms. Thanks. Which is the co-op, where? Here in town?
Here.
Here.
All right, good. All right. Well, I've got a lunch meeting with Dellendorf afterwards, I don't have plans. Maybe he can kind of get me some. So on the jobs issue, first let me say you don't need a trade agreement right now for companies, for foreign companies located in the United States to bring their employees. You don't need a trade agreement for that. It happens today. So and it happens outside of any restriction of any other trade agreement. Now, to do that, though, they have to have a visa to work here, and there is that separate process. And I'll look into it, but this is temporary entry for business persons, Chapter 12. Just have to be open to that. I don't know that this is anything else than we already have in law, but that question came up a couple days ago, and that's one of the homework assignments that I have already. With regards to job loss and job gains, we've actually increased the number of manufacturing jobs in this country since the recession. Of course, it was a recession, and it was a deep one, and a great one, and there were a lot of lost jobs, and not just in manufacturing. But we are getting manufacturing jobs back. We're getting manufacturing jobs back in Washington State, and we've had many, many months of positive private sector job growth as well. And the last month, not just 268,000 private sector jobs, but we saw the percentage of part-time jobs finally just fall, not off the cliff, but fall precipitously, meaning finally the number of the jobs being created are predominantly full-time jobs, not part-time. So that's good news. So that's today's story on the job market, and I'm sure there's folks running for office who have different views on that, but that's today's story. So the other thing about job loss, and I'm going to look into this, but I tell you, if I told folks yesterday in Island County, if I had a garbage can, empty garbage can, and I filled it with the numbers of reports that said there's going to be X number of jobs lost, and I filled it with X number of reports that filled it X number of reports that there's going to be jobs gained as a result of this agreement, I'd have two things. I'd have probably a net job gain or loss of 0, and I'd have a garbage can full of useless reports. Because the methodology of these reports that I have found depends upon the ideology of the folks writing it. And you can, if you read any one of these reports on its own, you could think that's really sensible, that's got to be the case. But then if you went to a different one with a different background, you read that and say that's really sensible, that's got to be the case. So you have to be discerning about that, honestly. I'm not going to argue about NAFTA. I wasn't, one of the great applause lines I once used, I want to let you folks, I never voted for NAFTA. People, yeah, you all know where I was when that NAFTA, but some people don't, so they applaud me, it's like, I wasn't there in Congress. Vote for or against it, right? So I don't want to argue NAFTA. There's lessons to be learned from NAFTA about its content, about what was in it, how it's different, how TPP is different, how other trade agreements are different. But I don't think trade agreements are about job creation or job, I don't think they're about job creation anymore, frankly. I think they're about this question that Lauren asked, the positives, like assessing their ability to level the playing field, or actually level the playing field to the advantage of U.S. businesses and workers who work there. And that's kind of how I see that assessment of jobs. But I'm always, and I'll say this finally too on this point, we're talking about TPP, but the trade agreements are not economic competitiveness policies. And we're focused on a trade agreement as answering that question for us. Trade agreements will not answer that question for us. Are we investing in the next generation workforce in our colleges by passing my bill that would connect 2 years of STEM education in high school with 2-year college degree in STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, with apprenticeships. We don't do apprenticeships very well in this country, in engineering and math and science. We do them well. We've done them well in construction trades, but European countries do apprenticeships really well in STEM jobs. We don't do that. We need to change that. Are we going to pass a transportation bill that helps, ensure we have a big league economy based on big league infrastructure instead of little league infrastructure? Are we doing basic research in our universities, public universities, that then is used to spin off? Those are the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of economic growth and a growth model that works for the United States. We tend to focus on these trade agreements, and I think that's to our detriment more often than not, because it sometimes diverts us from a lot of the other real work that we need to do for that longer term investment. I'll go to this side of the room and then back over here.
Walt Cooter.
Hi, Walt.
Hi. My question is, can loss of profit by a corporation be used to challenge our environmental laws in this trade agreement?
Yeah, that's it. Thanks for that. Thanks for that question. It was not a plan. I think what I've read, and we've tried to sort this out, there's an article 9.6.4. It's a minimum standard of treatment, and this is part of the investment chapter. There are 30 chapters in this, and there's only one on investment. And ISDS applies only to Chapter 9, okay, not to anything else. So 9.6.4 says, for greater certainty, the mere fact that a party takes or fails to take, and a party would be a signatory country or such. For greater certainty, the mere fact that a party takes or fails to take an action that may be inconsistent with an investor's expectations does not constitute a breach of this article on investment, even if there is a loss or damage to the covered investment as a result. That's the language that folks point to say expectation of profit or even loss, actual loss, is not a legitimate reason to utilize the ISDS process. Does that mean some companies going to ignore that and try to anyway? I think they will. I think they will try to challenge it. But it's really clear in the agreement that that is not a reason, and it would be an illegitimate claim brought if they use that reason. So, in other words, if the environmental regulation that was created or the environmental law that's passed resulted in a loss of profit, then that's, as Earl Boscott, who I worked for during the summers, binding books in his garage, he would say, I call that tough nuggets. Right? It's just tough nuggets. You don't get to use that. You don't get to use that reason. But it doesn't mean they won't try it. It doesn't. Like I said, you don't need trade agreements for foreign companies to challenge local land use decisions. I was a county council member in Snohomish County. A foreign-owned company challenged a local land use decision, and they didn't need a trade agreement to do that. So it doesn't mean it won't happen, but can't use that as a reason. At least the plain language I read.
David Dellendorf, San Juan Island. You said earlier that the trade agreements are no longer about job creation anymore, and you also had that analogy with the trash cans, and it kind of seems like you don't expect this agreement, or you're not convinced it will have a job benefit or a job loss. If you're just, and then so it seems like that's not going to be an issue in how you decide. Is that correct?
It's certainly not going to be one of the top issues I use to decide. Okay. I don't think that trade agreements today or in the future are going to be about job creation.
So then, following up on that, what are the issues that you will be important to you as you make your decision? Are they environmental, labor laws? What are they?
Well, I think part of it is trying to assess the, going back to Lauren's question about positive and negatives, I think trying to assess whether or not the positives are going to happen or not, and whether or not those negatives are going to happen or not. And that is, I think trying to assess these based on job numbers is, it's kind of pie in the sky. It's not, they aren't very objective standards to use, because the job numbers being created come out of subjective analysis. So I'm trying to look at the agreement with regards to, based on what I read, say, does ISDS do all the terrible things? And no one has argued to me ISDS is any wonderful thing. So ISDS do all the terrible things that people say it does, or is it something much more benign than that, and just to help with trade disputes on investment, as an example? Yes.
So if everybody says that they put this agreement together, the Obama administration and all the other countries, because it's all about trade, which implies jobs, but you don't believe there's going to be that benefit, then why do we even want to talk about it?
Well, I don't agree with your assessment about what everyone has said, but the administration even backs off from the jobs, backs off from the job argument. So, and I don't care what Vietnam says.
Yeah.
Honestly. This side of the room? Who hasn't asked questions? Okay, this side of the room, in the back.
Yeah, I'm John Cook, when you're Sam. And if they say what I've read, that individuals that make over $88,000 are the only ones that should benefit from this, and the median income for Washington is $58,000, and the islands are $5,000 less than that. If that's true, is that going to affect your vote? I mean, being that you're higher than.
John, who are they?
Multiple sources on the internet.
All right, still not good enough.
Okay.
Give me names.
Larsen TPP.
Mm-hmm. And their source. If you just give me the links and all that.
Democracy Now.
If you can give me the links.
Oh, I mean, if that's true, what I'm saying is, if that's true, is that going to affect the vote?
Certainly be something that is a factor in my decision.
I didn't understand that.
It will be a factor in my decision.
Oh, okay.
But you have to give me the links. Right? The thing is, I have people tell me all the time that they heard on that this is going to happen. And that's about the detail I get. If you have detail about sources and such, please send them my way. Someone asked the other day, will you look at the Sierra Club analysis now that Sierra Club has a position based on what they read as opposed to having a position based on nothing? Will I look at the analysis? The answer is yes. But you have to, and you can just send me the links, are fine, because we're collecting, one person, Tara Sabag in my DC office is sort of the clearinghouse for me to collect into the analyses that people want me to read, and so we can get through those.
So if I say about the extension on the medical, big pharma, that's another I have to send you a link to? Because they're extending the patents, that's going to affect generic medicines?
I prefer that you send me the links if you want me to read something, I'd prefer that you send that to me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Redirect.
It's not how it works.
Pam Jenkins, teacher on Marcus Island. My major concern about this trade agreement and everything is the environment. And the environment just doesn't affect our country, it affects our planet and the future of children. Reading in Public Citizen some of the investor state problems that have happened with large companies that have gone into other countries and created a huge environmental mess and walked away from it, and it's been difficult to get them to do things about that. Often there isn't the money to be able to litigate that successfully. So I have concerns about that. Really hope that you are always keeping in mind, how can we, the STEM jobs, the doing some apprenticeship or is wonderful, but really, let's really focus on science and what we can do, and trade and everything, and transportation. How can we move us along further and using clean energy?
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Absolutely. I think I can later send anyone who's interested the work I've done on clean energy and trying to get us to move faster on a clean energy economy. I think it's important that to pay attention to the climate change treaty discussions that will be taking place later this month. And the idea that, you know, if the U.S. and China can drag others along on policy changes of climate change, then I think we're going to be farther down the road from a global perspective on climate change. If anyone has specific examples if they believe are of companies that have done investments in countries they believe are and have had a negative result that are a result of an ISDS, Investor-State Dispute Settlement. Some are not, some are. But just because a company does something bad in another country doesn't mean it's a result of an Investor-State Dispute Settlement. But some are. I just want to be sure that we're arguing from what is happening as a result of a trade agreement, what isn't happening as a result of a trade agreement.
This was from reading Public Citizen.
Yeah.
And I didn't bring that article with me
Did you?
today. I didn't. I
yeah. Just
I got
again.
myself here, but I didn't get it.
Yeah, just send a link to
Okay,
us.
I will. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. This side of the room? Yeah.
Well, first I'll just give you a particular...
Get your name?
Right. My name's Richard Ward.
Richard.
There's some details in the agreement about the percentage of foreign components that can be in automobiles.
Yeah.
And some tricky language in there about a country that was providing those components, getting them from a third party. And this is just a detail, but this is an up and down vote, right? The Congress, we're on fast track, right?
Correct.
So a detail like that cannot be addressed effectively by the Congress. Somebody from Michigan could not have any real ability to rewrite that section. Is that correct?
If they wanted to, right, yes, this is an up or down vote on the agreement. Do you have a question or anything?
Well, maybe I'm just making a comment that
Okay.
this process, because the Congress voted for fast track, and if there are objections to particular aspects of an agreement that wasn't made public until recently, it doesn't seem to me that there is a prospect for improving the agreement.
Yeah. So the particular section you're talking about, on top of the general issue, the particular section is the Rules of Origin chapter, and it is a it's a complex chapter to sort through. It is again one of the homework assignments that we have from folks in the district. We brought up other places too, so I appreciate you bringing it up here. And trying to sort out whether or not, or what stops a party country from using a non-party country, a third-party country to do certain work, and whether or not that meets the content rules of the agreement. The broader issue of whether or not we can amend the agreement is one of the folks who brought up, and I appreciate what people are saying about Congress can't amend this, but the practical reality of trying to negotiate any agreement, whether call it a trade agreement or maybe it's a non-proliferation treaty or whatever, what have you, with 435 members of the House and 100 more senators, it just isn't. You get nothing done. Now maybe you don't get nothing done on TPP, but there may be agreements with other countries that you do want to get something done, well, you can apply the same concept to that, but it bogs down that agreement, and it never gets done. I don't think we'd want that. So at least with regards to trade, since '74, Congress has chosen to use its authority in the Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, which folks bring up. It says Congress shall regulate commerce between foreign nations in the several states and with Indian tribes. And that's all it says. It's the only direction Congress has in the Constitution about regulating commerce. It's the Commerce Clause. And since '74, when it's come to trade agreements, Congress has chosen to do a trade promotion authority bill in some form. It's never been the same form, it's been in some form. And when it came to this one, again, we did a TPA, Trade Promotion Authority bill, a pretty complex one that laid out not just the objectives that Congress would want to see in this agreement, but also the process that in detail that we'd have to go through before we took a vote. And that's how we've chosen to do it. It's just, you may think it is, we may disagree. I think it's very impractical to have 535 other people negotiating individual parts of this agreement when you're negotiating with other countries. And that's why you do. I also think that people ask why do you vote for TPA? I think presidents should have the authority to negotiate trade agreements, and that Congress will have the final say on an up or down vote. And we get to assess the success or the result of a president's work with that vote. And I appreciate people disagree with me on that, and we may continue to happily or otherwise disagree on that.
So a couple of observations. One is the breakdown of who was doing the negotiations.
Yeah.
So it was represented as the multinational corporations. I think in the future, you could think about how environmental organizations could be part of it, how trade unions could be part of it, and other human rights organizations. So that's a thought that comes to mind. It's not a question. Another thought that I had for you is if you're concerned about the job loss, I think there's enough history about NAFTA to demonstrate that, in fact, there is job loss from it. And if you think about the situation of country of origin and percentage of parts for cars, if the percentage of parts for the United States manufactured piece goes down, which it will in TPP, then that probably equates to jobs lost. I think there's a way of calculating that, but that's just my opinion. The question that I had, though, is really about food safety. I mean, and I can dig up an article on that, but there are concerns about food safety because of the way in which TPP will obscure some of the way in which food is handled and processed, and the way it makes itself on your table here. And so I just wanted to raise that as food for thought. I don't know if you read that section at all, or if you have an opinion, but that's my question. What do you think about food safety in the context of TPP?
Yeah, sure. I haven't read, it's a sanitary and biosanitary section, chapter. That's actually interestingly enough, I was challenged the other day about why are you doing these town halls, or just a huge check in a box. Well, I didn't hear anything about food safety up until I started doing these town halls.
Great.
Food safety with regards to TPP.
Yeah.
Until, I heard a lot about it before because we voted on a bill that would have, that in the House that passed, I voted against it, that would preempt state laws on GMO labeling. And I voted against that bill. But I hadn't heard a lot from anybody on food safety with regards to TPP until these town halls. So again,
It's kind of a personal matter for me because, and I'll just give you some context. One of my children was in the hospital for a very long period of time, had a condition that is related to a food safety related issue. And in the course of trying to understand this condition, I realize that there's this world of food safety issues out there, and like the Jack in the Box thing.
Yeah.
And so it's a concern because we still have that problem here in the US, and if TPP undermines some of what's there and there really isn't enough, then that's a really big problem.
I'm glad you said that, because I agree with the food issue. It's a big concern, especially for a community like this, it's a farm community. But what I haven't really heard is an answer to, I think it was Bill? Anyway, this question, if jobs,
Yeah.
well, I'm not you.
Dave.
If jobs are not, you don't feel that they're necessarily that affected by this, I don't quite understand what the issues are that you see are the most important to look at or that are going to most affect your decision.
I did answer that. It was also, I referred back to Lauren's question about what would be the positive and what would be the negative, sort of assessing the agreement based, well, assessing first off, does the agreement meet the objectives of the Trade Promotion Authority objectives that we laid out, just sort of on its face? So if you line that up to what we said the president is supposed to go do, does it do that? And then second is, second set of questions is assessing a lot of these other questions about can we use, as an example, investor-state dispute settlement to the advantage of U.S. companies and U.S. workers in order to help get the things that we make, things that we grow, things that we produce into the hands of customers around the world. In that sense, it does create jobs. I'm just saying, what I'm saying about the jobs thing is that there are plenty of reports that count up exactly the number of jobs that are going to be created or lost as a result of TPP. And they're all over the map. And because there are so many, it actually undermines the credibility of those reports. So it didn't seem to me really helpful to spend a lot of time going through that criteria. If you think that that's important, I'm not telling you shouldn't think it's important. I'm telling you that based on my assessment, trying to assess the methodology and therefore the veracity of the numbers and all these reports about jobs lost and jobs created as a result of this agreement seems like a pretty futile effort to me. When I can be looking at whether or not the text of the agreement actually helps U.S. companies and the workers at U.S. companies get the things that they make, grow, otherwise produce into the hands of a lot of consumers in these other countries. But generally, I'm thinking it's all the way back.
Peter Ritter, San Juan Island. I would like to open with kudos to you for your support of the non-motorized travel portions of the transportation bill. But my question...
Oh, stop right there. Go ahead.
After 8 years in the works, we finally got country of origin labeling on our food, and now some trade agreement or another, which I don't have a trace on,
Sure, I'll walk through that.
has been used to eliminate that. I would like to hear from you, if you can, if there are provisions in this agreement that would allow things like that to happen, that you would automatically vote against it. To me, the most important thing is for us to be protected from toxics from other countries being brought to us and sold to us just because they're cheap.
I'll just say right now, the only thing that would make me automatically vote for this, just to take that a little bit, is Article 29.5, which prevents tobacco companies from using ISDS to throw out anti-smoking laws in the countries that are party to this. And the American Cancer Society is very supportive of that provision. And that's the only article I can think of right now that would make me vote for or against. Now, that's the only thing that would fit that criteria about that. So if you like the fact that tobacco companies won't be able to use any portion of this trade agreement to throw out tobacco control laws, whether it's smoking bans or other anti-smoking, then you should you don't have to support it, but you should write a thank you note to the American Cancer Society for all the work they did on that. So that's that. The second thing I'd point out is on COOL, country of origin labeling. I know about that really well because I helped write it. I was on the Ag Committee when we put that in the Farm Bill. And then it took a while for the rules to get done. But I also know why it was tossed out because of a challenge in the World Trade Organization, is because it was protectionist. It wasn't written as a country of origin labeling law, it was written as a protectionist trade rule. And the Canadians took us, the US, to WTO and took us to task on it over beef. Some of you may know this, but if you don't, a lot of beef in your store today is born here in the US. A high school friend of mine in Arlington raises calves, or calved there, and raised for a year or so. They're trucked to Canada, and the Canadians feed these things till they get big and, well, not big and fat, you wouldn't buy it, big and meaty, and then they're brought back to the US for butchering. Is that Canadian beef or US beef? See, no one's been able to answer that question for me. And that's where we got in trouble. That's where we got, and that's, you know, that's why it's great that I helped get the $30,000 to get the mobile processing unit here in San Juan, in the San Juans, so that we could raise lamb and process lambs and sheep, so you know exactly where your food's coming from. But not everybody buys that, and you know, some people just go to the store. Their heat comes from a thermostat, their light comes from a light bulb, and their milk comes from the store refrigerator. And they have no idea where their food comes from. Should they? Absolutely. I'm all for it. But many people don't care. And that's where we got in trouble with COOL. So there are a lot of countries with country of origin labeling laws, and they're not being challenged at all. So we can rewrite, it doesn't prevent us from rewriting a country of origin labeling law, so long as that's what it does, as opposed to become a barrier to trade when you write it because you want it to be a barrier to trade. Yes?
I got another question about Article 19, the forced compulsory labor section. Written in there, it says that they want to discourage forced labor. It seems to me that that's not strong enough.
Which article in?
Article 19.6.
All right, thanks. Good.
They wrote in there that they would discourage forced labor. It seems like we can't have fair trade if people are being forced to produce products. It should be not allowed. And I know this is reaching back to the other fellow here that said, you know, we can't really discuss specifics. But it seems like that's a pretty basic trade piece.
Yeah.
So, just wondering what your thoughts are on that part of it and whether it would impact your decision.
It's a good question, and one of those areas that I'm still evaluating a lot of this. People don't think I am. I got it, but I am, and I think that I will say this: reading one article without reading the rest of it, of the chapter and the context of it, wouldn't give you doesn't give me an accurate picture of what is enforceable or not enforceable. Okay. So the idea of compulsory labor is abhorrent. It's slave labor, and there's no way. Well, if one thinks that President Obama and his team would have a trade agreement, be supporting a trade agreement, where slave labor was going to be allowed in the countries we agreed to, then you and I have a different view of the president's objectives in this trade agreement or any other trade agreement. Okay? So that tells me that maybe there's something else in that chapter that should make me feel a little bit better about 19.7/6
Well, I
in
read the
particular.
whole article,
Yeah,
and
right,
and
right.
it doesn't really address it in other areas, but
Well,
it just.
it's a good homework assignment for me then
It just seems
too.
sort of milquetoast.
Yeah, right. Well, there's a lot of that in here.
There is.
But a lot of those sections aren't the enforceable sections, right? It's kind of they're preamble-esque, if you will. And it's deeper in the article where the actual work of the text takes place. And that's true for most.
Tom Muncy, in the first Democratic presidential debate, Hillary Clinton indicated that she was rethinking her position on the TPP. Does her position on the TPP influence the way you might vote on it?
No.
No?
No. I don't give much thought to what presidential candidates say in a presidential race, usually. I will say this, what Donald Trump says will influence me. Because if he's president and he's for it, we are going to, if he's president, we're going to hell anyway. So I will be voting against anything that he's for.
Good.
Lauren?
Isn't slave labor already happening in a lot of those countries? I mean, it seems like the reason it's possibly discouraged and not just downright or outright not allowed is because some of those countries might object.
Yes, it's possible.
I mean, do you know
I think
if
in some
slave labor is already
countries,
happening in some
I think in
of
some
those
countries there's slave labor happening as we would define it, yeah. But I think getting back to, was it John? Walt's question is what else in the agreement helps us leverage to get changes to happen in those countries as well. But then the next step is what happens with, it's the next president, really, that if it passes, we'll be enforcing it. What would that next presidential administration do to enforce that or anything else in the agreement if it passes, with or without my vote?
Thank you.
My name's Nathan. You got a chuckle a minute ago about Donald Trump and his candidacy. I would just like to observe before I ask you the question that I don't think that this is a subject that's worth humor. Our country's facing a lot of very serious issues right now. Regarding Donald Trump, I understand that he's taking his lead from Senator Sessions from Alabama. I guess I have a two-part question for you. Are you familiar with Jeff Sessions' position on TPP?
Yeah, I think he's against it.
What are your thoughts about his position? The other side of the coin of my question is, since it's a 5,000 plus page document and it's dense, and you're a busy man with a lot on your plate, I'm curious whose interpretation, whose distillation, whose analysis of this agreement are you resourcing to help inform your decision?
So you weren't here at the beginning of this meeting? What's that? No, you were not. Oh, okay. Well, I did answer that, but I'll review that again for folks. First off, Jeff Sessions, a senator from Alabama. I think he's against it, and I don't want to be rude to Jeff Sessions. I don't care what a senator from Alabama thinks of my position, and I'm not looking to him for advice on his position on TPP as well. So that's the long and short of that.
Whose analysis?
So the other question about his analysis was, as I said earlier, if anybody has analyses of the whole thing or of individual sections, please get those to me. We are collecting those. I am reading it. It's, as I noted, it's 5,834 pages. The text isn't that long. A lot of that is in the tariff schedule, and don't read the tariff schedule. But the text is readable, and if you just choose to read one or two sections because those are most important to you, in the ISDS, or the investment chapter, is 52 pages long. And with some grit and determination, you can get through it. It is dull and dense, as you noted. So I am actually taking the time to read it, to review it, to review my review of it, to try to understand how it works. Some of it's really clear how it works, some of it's not as clear how it works. It's going to take a little more time to get through that. But as I noted, we have 120 plus days from the 5th of November to get through this. So that's what I'm doing.
The devil's going to be in the details, though. Those tariff agreements on the price of beans are going to mean a lot to somebody who's trading millions of metrics of tons of beans. Those are going to be people that profit from this agreement. The carpenters, the ag workers, the mechanics here on the island, the transportation workers, we're not going to see a dime of that. And our intuition is telling us that money's going to flow out of our pocket into corporations' pockets. That's our take on this.
Well, you could argue that happens today without trade agreements when you go shopping.
Absolutely.
I mean, so you know, that's, so thank you.
I won't buy anything from China anymore. Something I want, like a television set, or a watch, or a gadget. I won't do business with China because they kill their labor force. They kill people who disagree with them, who threaten their authority, whether it's a spiritual-based threat or if it's a civil liberty threat. That government is evil, and they've got blood on their hands. And I don't want our country to enter into any kind of an agreement with them that props them up, because I want that government to die so that people can live again.
Well, it won't be a part of TPP because they're not in it. But the challenge that you're providing me is to go to the president or the White House and say, don't do a deal with China on climate change, despite the fact that they're the largest polluter in the world. So I guess I'd have to disagree with the premise that the United States shouldn't be dealing at all with the largest polluting country in the world, since we're the largest energy user in the world. But we got your point, and I think we're going to differ on that. I think we're going to get wrapped up here. Oh, Jamie.
Jamie Stevens, Lopez Island. Thanks for coming.
County council member.
County council member. But I wanted to thank you for coming, and I was one of those neutral people because I don't know a lot about this. I've got enough on my plate with some other concerns out here. But I just wanted you to not be lost on you that every ferry served island took the time this afternoon or this morning, somewhere on a Sunday, to come and find out more information about this. And as you have been to the islands a lot, but as all of us know, that's a logistical nightmare that everyone has chosen to show up for your meeting.
Yeah, and I want to say too that on the way over, because Thomas and I were talking about the commuter town hall and the bicycle town hall, it occurred to me, and we'd have to coordinate this with WashDOT, but doing a town hall on the inner island. Now, I don't know,
We do the hookup.
WashDOT will have to do it. Thomas was like, no, it's just an idea, Rick, don't do it. You were tired when you came up with it.
Halcover does it all the time.
Talk to Orchid Power and Light Company first.
They do it all the time.
Oh, that's a good idea. So but we might do that. Now I want to do that maybe in, late July. And we'll take all day. So thanks so much. I appreciate it very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.